Okay, well, here we are, guys. Thanks everybody for joining us for the first panel meeting, which is kicking racial stereotyping and bias out of the tech recruiting process. We're joined today by Damina McQuaid, Kim Hout, Noel Burgess, and myself, Ellis Norman, the Director of Enterprise Sales for HackerEarth. So happy to have everybody here. Figured we're going to start with a round of quick introductions, and then we'll get going with some questions. So, Damina, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'm Damina McQuaid. I'm a recruiting manager at Microsoft for Azure.
Awesome. And who wants to go next?
I'll go next. So, Noel Burgess, I'm a talent partner for C+ AI organization working out of the San Francisco Bay Area.
And I'm Kim Hout, and I am a senior manager of global talent acquisition at CSG, based just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And again, as I said, I'm Ellis Norman. I'm the head of enterprise sales here for HackerEarth. I'm based out of Austin, Texas. So yeah, excited to have everybody here for a super important topic and something that's very near and dear to, I think, all of our hearts. So to kick it off, we're going to have a kind of group question, and we can just go down the line. Damina, we'll start with you. So in your mind, how important is diversity to you personally, and what value does it bring to the recruiting process?
Good question. Let me tackle the personal one first, then I'll talk about why it's important for companies. Diversity is really close to my heart because I was raised primarily by my dad, who's disabled. He has cerebral palsy, for those who know what that is. And so I grew up seeing someone that I love and respect and watching people, judge him and treat him differently because he walks differently. And so for me, when I see inequities, it's just a big time trigger for me. And right now it's all over the news. I mean, you're seeing people like Breonna Taylor, George Floyd get murdered because of the color of their skin. And I hear stories from friends about, how terrified they are to get pulled over, or how terrified they are to get pulled over with their kid in the car, or how they get followed around a store because of the color of their skin. Or, one of my friends, he almost got arrested by grabbing something out of his car at night, and he had his key, and I can't keep hearing those stories. And as a friend, I can't say nothing or do nothing, is why I care about it personally. Professionally, and why companies should prioritize it is obviously it's the morally right thing to do, but if that's not enough for you, I think it also makes business sense. Companies, they're building products and services for everyone, or they should be. And if you want your products and services to appeal to every segment of the population, you need diverse teams building those products and services. If you have diversity on your teams, you'll have new and different ideas. Everyone has different, experiences and backgrounds. So if you have new ideas coming to the table, you'll have an innovative company. So that's.
You're on mute, Ellis.
That's a phrase of 2020, I think. It's going to be your own, right? So, Noel, let's pick on you next. So,
all right.
What is so important about diversity, both personally and professionally?
As a diverse individual that's almost 40 years old, my whole life has, really been as an underrepresented, individual on looking for equal opportunity, looking to feel, belonged in society, and just really looking to, build a community of individuals that, are at least open to the idea of equality and being comfortable around individuals that look like me and have diverse backgrounds. So for me, it's personal. It hits home. With Breonna Taylor, with George, Floyd, that could easily be me. I could have been that individual in my house that unfortunately, passed away like Breonna Taylor. I could have been that individual, George Floyd, where someone, leaned down on my neck because of the way I look, primarily, if not solely based on the way I look. So it's a very important part of my life. it's personal, obviously, but then the transition to the business part of it, it just, as Damina alluded to, it makes a lot of sense. The moral argument, I think, is a little bit clearer, but the business argument is not. So I'll just say this, more diverse teams, there's so many studies that show they're higher performing. They come up with better, innovative products. And from a business standpoint, like Damina said, when you have products that are being sold to not just one demographic, to all, unfortunately, those product teams, those engineering teams, the leadership teams don't reflect society. And I think that's why there's so many products, even in the last year, where it comes out and you're like, oops, it offends one demographic group, if not more. And you kind of delve into a little bit more and you look at the product team and you're like, interesting. It's very homogeneous. And then it's kind of like, well, this is why that happened. So there's just things to think about. And I look forward to talking about it more.
Awesome. And Kim, that leaves you. What do you personally think is so important about diversity, and also professionally, what's important?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with all of the comments so far. Personally, I love to collaborate with folks all over the globe. And I think that this really needs a critical focus, especially right now, as we're kind of teetering on, how can we push innovation forward? You need diversity of thought on your teams to push innovation forward. You need those different perspectives. You need to bring them on board. I think a lot of companies have been stuck in this mindset of culture, culture, culture. Well, culture is hiring sometimes just like-minded individuals, and that's not going to promote that innovation. And so I think it's a critical piece of the discussion for companies to really innovate and drive forward.
Awesome. It does certainly seem like culture's become a buzzword nowadays, hasn't it? So, okay, awesome. And Damina, we're going to start with you for one of the more longer form questions. So we've got a lot of recruiters in attendance, I would expect at this point. So what are some tips that recruiters and hiring managers should follow in order to reduce the bias in the recruiting process, particularly in tech?
So many. I'll start with a couple though. First, post all roles externally and internally. If you don't post your roles externally and you just slot someone from your internal team, that's obviously bias, and you don't even have a shot to bring a new diverse candidate to the table or some new ideas and opinions. So first, post everything internal and external. Second, I think it's the recruiter responsibility to bring a diverse slate to every single role. So do that. What else? I also think that it's a recruiter responsibility to speak up in those pivotal moments. Sometimes I think recruiters forget how much power they truly hold in this process. So when there's situations, and any recruiter on this call knows those situations, when a team is right on the verge of a hire or no hire, or right on the verge of leveling someone senior. And you have those moments to speak up and be brave and influence. So do that. I think that's my initial take on how to.
Got it. So remember, each and every single one of you guys has power, and you got to go to bat for that candidate, and ultimately for the leadership too. They need to know when there's a better way to possibly do things, right?
Yeah, and a good recruiter being able to influence, is across the board. That's really what separates a good recruiter from a great recruiter and beyond.
Yeah, sorry, I'm gonna add one more thing too. I think, it's overwhelming when you see the news and you don't know what you can do to help. As a recruiter, one way to create equity, a really good way, is to hire more Black people, particularly in leadership roles. That's a great way to.
Awesome. Got it. Guys, does anybody want to add anything to any thoughts as we move along? I think it's important we keep this kind of conversational as we go. So if anybody wants to add or expand, please feel free. Awesome. So Noelle, we're gonna ask you the next one. So what do you think, what metrics do you think should be kept in mind when you're creating a hiring plan and strategy? And what KPIs can we not only implement, but track in order to make sure that that's successful?
Good question. A couple ways to look at this. So, diversity is representation. Inclusion is something different, right? Like diversity is very much looking at, numbers. Inclusion is the sense of belonging, how the individual feels, equal opportunity. So usually, you parse that down to, gender, education, nationality, culture. That's kind of the way like I look at it. And that's my mindset when I'm looking at, my funnel, or I'm looking at the strategy for the organization I'm supporting. The key metrics I look at, and I just want to be clear, the way I frame it is you identify the monitored group you want to look at, whether it's Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, disabled, First Nation. You identify that quote unquote monitored group, and then the control group is either the dominant group in the company, the labor market, or in society. Now that tends to be in the US, white males, but depending on the company, it could change depending on the demographic makeup. So the 6 or 7 key metrics I look at are representation, retention, recruitment, selection, promotion, development, pay, and engagement. And I know I said those fast. I'm going to jump into a couple of them, but those are the things I look at. Representation is always the percentage of the monitor group versus the control group. So for example, if your current representation of female, white females in the company is at 35%, you want to make sure that you're hiring at a rate higher than that currently in your funnel, if that makes sense. So currently where Microsoft is in, H1, we just started our fiscal year, and let's say X group is hiring 17% above current representation. That's one way you can look at it. Another is selection and promotion. Who from your funnel, those individuals that are going into the funnel, your applicant pool, who's end up getting hired? Is it someone that looks like me? Is it someone that looks like Ellis? Is it someone that looks like Kimberly? Yeah, that's you, if you didn't know. So those are some of the ways I look at it. But that's only really the beginning. Another big piece of it, and this is personal for me, is over the last 30 or 40 years, when you look back to, my parents' generation, our first or second step was really just getting a college education, if that was possible, and getting hired. You really didn't look at being a director or a VP, and you really didn't look at being a CEO. So when you fast forward, 40, 50 years, and we are, where we are now, just getting hired is not good enough anymore for diverse individuals. I can speak specifically to African Americans. We want to see more representation when it comes to leadership positions, because that's where the influence of power and opportunity, really is, especially to, blaze those pathways for other individuals on the up and coming. So again, it's very great from a metric perspective to hire a lot of female individuals, a lot of African Americans, a lot of Hispanics. But then when you start to really dig down the data and you start asking yourself, Fortune 500 companies, how many female CEOs are there? 1 or 2 right now, maybe 3. How many Latinx? Even less. How many African Americans? Even less. And I think that's the next step. So when you look at promotion, when you look at selection, when you look at those individuals getting hired, please dig down deeper in that data, because I think a lot of companies look at it from a macro perspective. It's, well, we hired, 35 African Americans, but it's like, well, what position did you hire them in? Did you hire them in administrative? Did you hire them in janitorial? Did you hire them in tech positions? And then within tech positions, are you hire them within leadership positions? Because the numbers, sometimes people say numbers don't lie. That may or may not be true, but the way you interpret them definitely can color it one way or another. So I strongly urge looking at the data and developing key insights from it, just not taking the numbers for what they are, and then making an actual plan around them.
Great advice. Awesome advice. Anything to add to guys, Damina or Kim, that the idea that just getting hired is not enough? That's that's the key right there, right?
I could not agree more with that response. I think sometimes people look at this as a talent acquisition problem only. Like, we're the ones who are going to solve it across the board. But it's employer brand. It's the information you're putting out there. It's the opportunities within the organization. There's so many other pieces collaboratively that need to come together to do the right thing. And I could not agree more with that response.
Awesome. Well, Kim, keeping on the kind of thread, how do you help hiring managers see the importance of actually removing unconscious bias in the hiring process? And is there anything else that you'd like to add to that in regards to not only bias, but anything else?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a few different ways to look at this. I mean, TA professionals and all these different companies are building out different, blind techniques and AI technologies that we can cut down resumes or focus on skills only to reduce bias, which is fantastic, but we need to focus on addressing where those biases are with hiring managers and interview staff and the company culture and everything else. Because if you don't address that and you implement all of these tools, all you're going to do is hardwire those bias into those tools and into those processes. And so it's training, it's education, it's understanding, it's providing transparent feedback to hiring managers. I mean, sit in on interviews, listen to what's going on. I mean, there's ways that you can look at pre-assessment tools or whatever it may be, but you really have to understand what's going on within your organization and your interview processes and what's actually happening to be able to address it. And so I think with hiring managers, it's calling them out. It's really identifying what's going on. I mean, you could plug and play any tool or any change in your process, but if you don't address those biases, they exist, you're like I said, you're just going to hardwire it right back into your process in a new fashion.
Hard to put a Band-Aid on a mortal wound, right?
Yes.
No, and I would agree. Just add to that, it's like the old adage, wisdom before weapons. It's really, if you don't have the right philosophy and mindset, those blind type of AI things are just a tool. So like Kimberly said, if it's already inherent in your culture and you don't address those first, all you're going to do is really weaponize that even more when you take some of the human element out of it with, a tool like AI and some of these blind things. They just really won't help solve your problem. And then also with retention, you get the individuals in, like, what are the programs you have to keep those individuals there as well? So again, they're great ideas. Don't get me wrong. I think technology and a lot of different, atmospheres or environments can help, but it's what's behind the technology, who's programming it and who's looking at it on a day-by-day basis.
Yep, could not agree more. And Damina, a question for you. What are some initiatives that you've taken to come out as a diverse brand to potential candidates? What do you think?
Yeah, good question. When it comes to branding, I mean, I think that it's more important to actually have the action. Like, when people show up on site, do they see people that look like them? When they have an interview loop, does that loop look like them? If it's a woman, is there another woman on the loop? If it's a minority, is there another minority on the loop? And I think that the action that I personally have taken, and I know Microsoft as a whole has taken, is really focusing on the people managers. That band is so important because they can help remove bias, not only in the interview process, but in the company. It helps with retaining diverse workforce because you need to see that, leaders above you look like you so that you subconsciously know that it's possible. And I also feel like when you have leaders and people managers that are diverse, it works like a talent magnet for other diverse talent because their referrals are, going to have a good share be diverse as well. So I think rather than focusing on branding, like, it's cool to have pictures that look inclusive and stuff, but like, you need to actually walk the talk, in my opinion.
Just getting hired is not enough, right?
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree. I mean, was kind of what I was thinking too, with CSG. I mean, we defined our commitment, and integrity is one of our values in doing the right thing, but it's living those values and taking action on them and seeing what we can do to continue to enhance this. And it ties into so many different areas. I know personally, CSG, we're hiring a chief diversity officer and looking for someone that can come in, further collaborate and drive these initiatives forward and pull some, resource groups together to focus on that. We've, done some things from a recruiting perspective in terms of, looking at job descriptions and not unnecessarily limiting candidate pools, looking at that data, those metrics, addressing where those gaps are and driving it forward. But yeah, it's not so much about just kind of showcasing a brand, but just doing the right thing authentically.
Noel, anything to add to that?
I would just say, and this is me personally, I always take a look around, not what necessarily individuals are showing me, it's what I can see for myself. So, and again, I don't want this to come off the wrong way. It's great when you're interviewing and, they find someone of a similar demographic or several individuals to interview. Like, I think that's great. But I know for me, one of the things I do is I try to talk to individuals that are not presented to me. So I can honestly say, like, when I interviewed, at Microsoft and, last year, I remember when my loop was over and, I walked up to individuals that had no part of the recruiting organization. So there was some janitorial staff, and I remember talking to them, and I was like, well, how are you really treated? That was one of the questions I was like, how do you feel, like being here? I think those are the things that, matter to me. Taking a look around and see if I can find information on what leaders were in charge. Were there more female leaders like Damina in charge, like that had some authority? Were there, more people of color? I think candidates really starting to pay attention to that, whether it's, on site, even on LinkedIn, where, you start just typing in keyword searches and see who you can find who's actually in charge. Those are the things that are important. And again, I totally get it. It's always putting your best foot forward. And I appreciate the gesture of making sure that my panel is not, in my case, all full of white males. I think that's good. But I also want to take a look around and see for myself, behind the scenes, what's really going on.
Absolutely. And kind of changing gears for a second, when it comes to resolving some of those, let's say, structural issues in the existing hiring plan, what do you think, or what advice would you have for recruiters or hiring managers to get that upper management buy-in to actually make systemic changes?
So some of it's been touched on already about, you have, I think Damina said, you have more authority and more power than you think you do. That can, vary depending on the organization, obviously your disposition. It's really, in my world, I work with mostly engineers. So as much as I love an impassioned argument, it's only going to get you so far. It comes down to the data, right? And showing the data on how this is actually beneficial, not just from a moral perspective, but also from a business perspective. And it really needs to come from the top down. The business leader on top of the recruiting leader really need to be on the same page and drive this through their chain of command. Also, as recruiters, we're the gatekeepers. So I'll be very transparent when it comes to the way I work through things. I don't let hiring managers move forward with a referral or a candidate that is not diverse when they start off that way. So let me dig into that a little bit deeper. I think we're all recruiters on this phone. Sometimes, a manager or leader will have someone in mind. Unfortunately, sometimes they're not diverse, and they'll open up a position and say like, "Hey, I have Kimberly in mind. Let's just move forward to an onsite." And one of the things I'll say to them, as a reply is like, I think that's great. Referrals are great. That's someone that you have some type of connection with, but we should also look at candidates that are outside of the norm of what you currently have, and then present them with data of their current makeup of their organization. What if they have 10 engineers, reporting to them, and 9 of them are white males? This is the time to really start pushing diversity that way. So overall, I would say come with data. Obviously, come with your heart. I think an impassioned argument is also good, because we're all people. Leaders are people, VPs are people, CEOs are people, and come to them with that as well. But I really feel that it's our job to be those gatekeepers and manage up to our leaders on this is the right thing to do morally and from a business end.
And I'll kind of unpack or ask you to double click on it a little bit more, but who would you, in terms of advice for who they might speak to, let's say that they have the recruiter in question has a manager that might be resistant to change. What type of advice would you give to that person to actually get to where they need to be and make sure that it's actually heard by leadership?
So I would say for the direct individual you're working with, give them the opportunity. I try to give the opportunity to do the right thing. I always do that in my personal life and professional. Come to them with the data and my opinion. Obviously, we can't force them to hire a candidate they don't want to hire, but it's really that consistent message, to that leader. If you find that you're having difficulty with them, I think that's when you use the tools available to you to escalate, whether it's to your direct manager or to theirs, and get them involved in the process. It's been my observation that it's usually both ends of the spectrum that get it. It's the first line individual like myself, and then like the CEO or the director. Usually it's like playing telephone as a kid. The message when you're going around sometimes gets lost. So I think it's really just making sure that everyone's on the same page, pushing back where you can, and trying to show those small wins that like, hey, you hired someone like Damina and this is outside of your norm, but like, look how great she's performing. Let's get 2 or 3 more individuals that look like her, or look like Kimberly, or look like me into the mix. It really is helping the diversity of your organization, is driving the innovation, and it's moving us forward.
Got it. So bring your data, be prepared to communicate, and stand your ground. Go to bat.
Definitely stand your ground.
Yeah, beautifully said, Noel. Just a couple more things to add on. It's really easy for an experienced recruiter like Noel or Kimberly, when you've heard these same objections over and over again, you know exactly the rebuttal in your head to use. For newer recruiters, think about it ahead of time. So then when they come up, you have a rebuttal ready. Like even write it down if you need to is one thing. The second thing, I think it's so important, as I move into a manager role, to provide that air cover that recruiters feel like they can have those conversations and there's not going to be, any risk or bad repercussions. So I think for the recruiting leaders, like managers, directors, whoever on the call, give your team that air cover and make sure that they know that you have their back. There's been a lot of times where I second voiced calls to difficult hiring managers and backed up word for word everything that the recruiter has to say. And so I just think it's super important to have your recruiter.
Awesome. So let's change it up a little bit, guys. So Kim, this one's for you. In this remote first work environment that we're all currently a part of, how can work culture first be defined? And second, how can inclusiveness actually be promoted when everybody is remote?
So I get hung up sometimes on the word culture because I think it's misused and overused. So I have a different perspective because I've worked remotely now for about 4.5 years. So this was my norm before it became everyone else in my company's norm. And so I think that with the change, I've noticed that everyone's been trying to connect in new ways, that a lot of opportunities we had to build relationships maybe specific to an office now have become virtual. And the fact that they're virtual, so many more people can participate. And I think it was a huge eye-opener that we have all this technology to be virtual. Why are we not taking advantage of it? I mean, look at us sitting right here today in so many different locations, talking to so many people in other locations, and it feels like we're all together. And so using technology and finding ways that, okay, well, we used to do this in the office. Why can't we adapt it to, a women's leadership conference? Or if we're focusing on a STEM program, we just finished up our internship program for this summer, which was completely virtual. And it was so cool. Like, we got to play Pictionary and have happy hours, but we also got to have business meetings and see each other face to face. And so I think it's all about that connection. And I think that the fact that so many companies are global and that we moved into this remote work environment across the board, I think when it comes to inclusiveness, we really have an important opportunity right now to take advantage of it and run this forward, because someday we likely are all going to be back in offices or have the opportunity to be in office locations. But I think I think it's made an important change to the mindset of how a global culture within a company really operates and what advantages and opportunities we can take going forward.
I think that's actually a great thing to unpack a little bit. The idea that this is the only opportunity that we've seen in our lifetime for sure to be able to actually move the needle on both DEI and removing bias. So no, this one's not on the sheet, but guys, does anybody want to pick it up and run with it in terms of how important this opportunity is and just how we can actually leverage this technology to get this needle moved?
I mean, I can, first of all, Kimberly, I want to play Pictionary. So if we could set that up online, Kimberly, that would be great. Let's start with that.
Our next event is Pictionary and
done. All right, done. But on a serious note, I mean, I try to find the silver lining in this whole, like, where we are in 2020. And I've been talking about it a lot recently, with friends and colleagues, where I think this is going to be the best thing for diversity, because, we all live in this country, or I assume most of us live in this country that are online. And we understand that there's certain demographics, individuals that live in pockets of the country that major corporations. I mean, when you look at tech companies, they're really coastal, right? They're either on the West Coast in Seattle and California, they're on the East Coast in, New York in the Boston area. And when we look at, spreading out our diversity, not just by gender and race, but I always think that geographic diversity is something that's always overlooked by far. And now we can have remote employees where they don't feel like they have to leave their home, their family. We're going to come to you where you are now. And, it's always this fascinating thing. And I think tech companies, like, we develop technology to make productivity and bring us closer. But when we reflected on ourselves, it's like, well, no, you have to come to the office. And it's kind of like, what am I missing, right? So, I think you have, individuals like, and and there's no offense to them, but they have this idea of, like, this very outdated way of thinking where I have to monitor you physically in the office and there's things you're going to miss. And I think there's pros and cons to that, right? But I also feel now that we've been forced into this corner where everyone is remote now, whether you live in that city that you're headquartered or not, and you're seeing that productivity is not falling off, it's actually getting better. There's a lot of people that feel like I have more work-life balance because now I can, go running outside and go take care of this and then run back to a meeting and do all these things that you couldn't do before when you were forced to come into the office. You can hire people that are sitting in places that you may never think about opening up an office at. And these are great individuals with a certain skill set and mindset and diversity and culture add, not culture fit. And I'm sure I'll get to that later about that you would just never have the opportunity to, because they're just not going to move. And, over my career, I can't tell you how many individuals say, like, hey, I love your company, but I'm living in a 5-bedroom house in the South, and I don't want to leave that for where I live in California, where they're just like, yeah, I'm going to end up getting this 1-bedroom apartment and my family's not here because you won't let me work remote. So I really do feel that moving forward, there's a lot of companies that are going to go fully remote now. They're going to allow, and I think that's beneficial to add to our diversity.
Awesome. Yep. And so keeping that kind of in mind, and geographical bias has obviously been a huge issue, particularly in tech for ever, basically up until now, right? Damina, this one's for you. So bias, we all agree, can hinder progress no matter what. what do you think? And I think everybody should take this up, honestly. What do we all think is the most rampant type of bias in the tech industry? What have we all seen kind of individually, and what do you think the most prevalent is as a whole?
Yeah. One thing that's been on my mind a lot this last year or so, and I think Noelle might have touched on it super briefly, but the thing that I've realized is that referrals are bias. I used to preach, because I didn't know, right, that referrals were one of the greatest ways to hire because statistically they do better in loops, they're easier to close, like people have an idea of their core competencies and work ethic and all that. So statistically, they do better. But let's say you have a team of all white males. Most of their referrals are also going to be all white males because that's their network. And so the thing that I've realized is, although it can be a quick hire, it isn't necessarily the best. And it's really hard as a recruiter to level the playing field when one candidate is either internal or a referral, and the hiring manager has a relationship with them or has worked with them before. Even if you bring the greatest diverse candidate on the planet to the table, there's a huge bias there, and it's hard to level that playing field. So I haven't really figured out how to solve for this, to be honest with you. I think the first step is just being aware of it and making sure that the hiring managers are aware of it. The second thing that's been on my mind a lot is maybe doing more succession planning. And I know that that's typically done in like exec recruiting. And what succession planning is kind of planning if that leader was to go, who do we have in the pipeline, either internally and or externally to fill that gap. And I think that if we're a little bit more proactive and intentional about building that succession plan to include diverse candidates and start building those relationships with diverse candidates ahead, then they're going to have a relationship with that diverse candidate, and it might hopefully level the playing field. But again, I haven't figured it out. So if anyone else has any good ideas, let me know.
Guys, who wants to take that up next? No question that any form of nepotism carries with it some inherent bias, right? What do you think, in addition to referrals in the tech industry, what do you think is another type of very prevalent bias, conscious or unconscious, that we see?
Yeah, okay. I couldn't get to that mute button. I would say outside of that, one of the things that comes to my mind is around education. I think that a lot of leaders now within the tech space have gone through that natural progression of a 4-year degree in computer science, and then maybe, certifications and things since then. And, with the need for developers and other folks in the tech industry, we've seen coding schools, and we've seen, different websites where people can just go and hack away and really learn hands-on that may truly be a better developer than someone that spent 4 years in school. And I think sometimes this bias exists while they don't have that same formal education that I do, so they're not going to be successful like me. And I know that's sometimes something that I've seen come up. I've seen come up in the past, is not being open to different types of education, because technology is moving much more quickly than anyone can obtain a 4-year degree.
No question about that. And Damina, anything that you'd like to add? Or excuse me, Noelle, anything that you'd like to add?
I'll just say really briefly, intersectionality comes to mind with this, where it's like how race, gender, socioeconomic status, and other demographics play off each other. And it's interesting, hearing Damina and Kimberly talk, it's like, how does race and education play off each other, right? Like the quote unquote top schools, like the Ivy League schools, like what do those demographics of those schools look like? They're usually, white male. Socioeconomic status, where's most of the wealth in this country? What demographic has that? It's white men, you know what I mean? So it's like how those tend to play off, like how they tend to play off each other. And I think that's what makes it very dangerous. So as Damina talked about, like, you have a group of 10, engineers, and they all went to Yale and Harvard, and, who are they looking for in that next, hire? probably someone that went to Yale and Harvard because they're going to refer their friend group. And, you know, that's okay to a certain extent. But then when do you take a closer look and say, like, I need more diversity? And yes, if you're a software engineer that went to MIT, okay, like, that's great. But there's also great engineers that didn't have the opportunity or have an avenue to go to those places that may not even have a degree. Like Kimberly said, you went to one of the coding camps and now you're a quote unquote great engineer, but you won't even get a second look because you don't have the pedigree of going to a 4-year college, let alone going to a top tier 4-year college. And I think those things, how they play off each other, is very dangerous. And it's up to everyone on this phone, everyone in this conference to really push back on that and show them that a great or a good or a quality engineer or quality professional comes in all shapes, sizes, colors, socioeconomic backgrounds, nationality, religions, and keep pushing that message.
Absolutely. And Noel, this is a great kind of segue. So we always talk about unconscious bias, right? But is bias actually unconscious, right? Is there a chance that going to what we've been talking about and alluding about throughout the whole kind of conversation so far, that when you're actually hiring for a culture fit, you're actually committing bias, right?
So yes. So as I alluded to, that phrase is just, every time I hear it, it like the hair on the back of my neck stands up, because the culture fit means you have to fit the current culture right now. And if you don't, then that means you shouldn't be hired into that team. And it's so dangerous where I'll tell my hiring managers, I understand what you're trying to say, but to me, the better phrase is culture add. How can someone outside of the current dimensions and thinking and philosophy of your current team add to your greatness, right? Again, do you want 10 white males with the same background that all know each other? And I understand there's some pros to that because they feel comfortable with each other, but not to take this conversation into another direction, but true, like growth comes from some type of conflict. There's good conflict and there's bad. There's different opinions where people are meeting in the middle. And how do you do that with individuals that all think the same? I'm a psychology major. Groupthink is a real thing, right? And, I'm not going to go all 10 angry men on you, but it's like, that's the danger. That's the danger of that. So what I'll say to my hiring managers and my leaders, it's a culture add. This person has a different skill set that moving forward from a business perspective, you need. And I think all of us on this line are old enough to remember there's so many opportunities where we had a chance to advance the conversation or advance innovation. And we missed that opportunity because we didn't bring other speakers or individuals into that conversation at the right time. And that's one of my impassioned arguments that I'll bring to my hiring manager. Like, do you really want to miss this? Do you want to be behind the 8 ball because, a year from now, technology and the environment is moving in a different direction? Let's do that now. Let's bring that skill set in now, and let's see how that ends up adding to your, like, the greatness and, the bottom line of your team.
Awesome. Yep. And Damina, I'm going to ask the same thing to you. Do you think that all bias is unconscious? And if not, well, is a culture fit a great example of a conscious bias being it?
Yeah, I don't think all bias is unconscious. I think there's people that are just fucking racist, to be honest with you. To put it bluntly, hopefully swearing is okay. And like Noel said, I hate the phrase culture fit. It excludes people, and it's usually code for something else. It's like an easy out for something that they don't want to say. So I always probe deeper, and I ask, what do you mean by that? And normally they struggle to answer you because it's just like, I don't like this person, but I don't want to figure out a reason to tell you why that's legitimate. So I hate it. Oh, and I also really like culture add too, by the way, because you're wanting to add new and different ideas. So.
Right. I think that's an important distinction too. So Ken, what do you think, and I'll ask the same to you, in regards to culture fit and how we can eliminate it from our vernacular and from practice? What do you think some good, tactics might be?
I don't know. I mean, we'll talk about this when we get to the job descriptions. I think it's just, the vibe that you're putting out there in the community. What is your culture like, And I think that companies went down this culture fit hole in a way that they thought that they were going to attract the right talent. But instead, they were very much limiting diversity within their organizations by only attracting like-minded individuals. Now, I think that it's very important that a company has defined values that they live by day in and day out. And to me, I think that speaks more volume than here's our culture fit. Here's our environment. I mean, I used to work for an organization that had that kind of bro culture mentality. And it was attracting the wrong talent. And I think it's more about defining, owning, and living values within an organization.
Certainly seems like it's more of a way to exclude qualified people than to
Yes.
find great talent, right? So speaking of job descriptions,
Yes.
how do we bake diversity into a JD?
So I hear the word bake and I just think cookies. Cookies are my favorite. And it's not so much like what you're baking in, but it's the ingredients that are there and how you're presenting them and enhancing them. So for example, if you do have a job description, like you're hiring a rock star or a ninja and like maybe more masculine words, or, are you really balancing and offering a neutral job description that's going to appeal to the person with the right skills, not someone that you think is going to fit into your culture? Because ideally, you're looking for someone that has the right skills, that can be successful, that can help your company innovate and drive it forward. And the job description is where you start. I mean, think about how many people go and look at a job description and maybe have not heard of the company that they're applying to before. They're going to go look, if it's something of interest to them, but that may ultimately be the first impression that your company gives a potential candidate. And you want to make sure that you're doing the right things. I would say one of the most important pieces, and I know it's a hard discussion for recruiters to have, is to really only identify the must-have skills in the job description. That is key. We've all been on intake calls and hiring discussions with managers that they describe this person that just doesn't exist. And no, I need to have this, and this as a nice to have on the job description. Well, why? I can understand, yes, if I talk to someone that has XYZ skill set that is nice to have, I know that in the back of my mind that, okay, that is something that you were targeting and I can let you know that they have those skills, but you are going to unfairly limit your candidate pools by having way too many requirements. So have that discussion with the hiring manager and really hone in on those key skills that they are looking for. You can also include, at the bottom of your job description, your company's statement and commitment to D&I, highlighting the benefits that maybe you offer, whether it's, paternal leave or flexible work environments, have an equal opportunity statement. You can include all of that in there, but it's really more important to live by it. It all goes back to action over words. So
Just getting hired is not enough, right?
No.
So I know we've beaten this one to death, which isn't necessarily a bad thing to hire for culture. I think we can all agree that, yes, if you're hiring for a culture fit, it's a bad thing. Agreed? Agreed. So we'll move on. So, Damina, what are some creative ways that we can proactively source and hire candidates from underrepresented groups? Excuse me.
I think it's all about being intentional. So, there's many Boolean strings, where you use keywords, like if you're targeting women, she, her, Latina, Spanish is another great one because it'll pop on a LinkedIn profile under languages. Historically Black colleges, you can, build your strings out with those included. I've also seen people use the LinkedIn filter function and build some like freaking amazing stuff. Like there was somebody on my team who built out filters for African American, Black, Hispanic, Latino, and women, and used like the top 1,000 names. And it's a lot of work, but once you get it in a filter, then you save it and you always have it. And that's probably the most effective way I've seen someone pull on LinkedIn, at least. So there's lots.
Anybody have ideas outside of pulling from LinkedIn, or ways that we might be able to target or better activate some of those underrepresented communities?
I think different organizations, and obviously schooling is start early. I'm always surprised when I talk to my colleagues in the industry. I'm like, okay, what's your recruiting strategy at HBCUs, or and do you do it in an authentic way? Because one of my pet peeves is like, okay, you're gonna attend NSBE, right? And I think that looks great to put that in your blog, or you put that on Channel 7 News that X company is showing up at NSBE and they care, and like that's great. But then in the end, it's like, well, what's your strategy around that? Are you just doing it for the metrics, or are you doing it in a way where individuals feel included and they feel like our respective companies is somewhere they want to work? And then also tailoring your message. Like I think each group, each demographic has a certain way of going about things and a certain way of doing things. And I think it can't be one size fits all. The way you would recruit at Yale might be very different than how you do it at Howard. The way you recruit for Greek life might be very different than the National Society of Engineers. I think it's really opening up the pool and realizing that there's great professionals, again, not to beat a dead horse, as you said, that come in every shape and size, and just stop looking for the easy route or something that's right in front of your face. Get a little creative. Even recently, where I know this sounds crazy because I'm of that age, but I get on the phone with people. Like I'll literally just cold call them, or and get on the phone, but like, hey, like, what do you mean you don't want to talk by email? I'm like, no, I actually want to talk to you, or talk to you by video and learn more about you and what you want, and kind of like the groups that you're in professionally or at school. And that's a good way to tangent off of that to figure out new strategies on how to get diverse individuals to start coming to your company, or at least paying attention to what you're doing.
Focus on quality and not on quotas, right?
Exactly. That's exactly it. Because I think diverse individuals can see and that's right, Demina dropped some F-bombs, so I can say bullshit. Yeah. See through the bullshit. Exactly. see through the bullshit pretty quickly, right? If you don't come, with authentic message and actually show that you're trying to do the right thing, they'll see through that very quickly. And it's like, why join your organization? And one thing I'll coach candidates and other professionals that I work with is like, those interview processes are just as much as you interviewing the company than vice versa. Don't walk in there and it's a 50-minute conversation and it's 49 minutes of them grilling you. Make sure you stay in the beginning, like, actually, how much time do I have at the end to ask questions, and come in there with some authentic, real, pressing questions. The interviewer should feel challenged. Be respectful because it's a job interview, but they should feel challenged, where if I'm on the other side, I'm like, oh my God, like, they asked such a great question. Like, I didn't even know the answer. I never thought of it that way, or it wasn't just the usual, BS or baseline question. They actually put some thought in there, and it was an open-ended question. So I had to actually think through it.
Got it. So, and this is a good segue for you, Noel. What do you think about blind hiring? And on top of that, do you think it's actually a good strategy that can remove some bias from the hiring process? So I'll break the question into two parts, if that's okay.
Yep. Absolutely. So first of all, I think we talked about it before. You have to have the first mentality, the right mentality, before like going into these AI like blind type of hiring things. Like, if If everyone's not on the same page of this is something you want to do, as Dominic talked about, intentional, then you're wasting your time, in my opinion. That's first. The second thing is, in my opinion, there's certain spots or places in the hiring process that it makes sense, and then there's certain that they don't. I think, and I've heard a lot about it recently, where resumes come through and they get filtered. That might be a good way where you take the names out of it, because there's some names that are very ethnic that kind of give away. Like, look, my name's Noel, so sometimes when people talk to me on the phone and they don't see me, first thing is, like, they don't think necessarily that I might be African American. And when they see my name on a resume, Noel Burgess, it doesn't scream out Black person compared to, let's say, Jamal or Rashad, where all of a sudden you start thinking about that, right? So not everybody has that luxury. So I think taking the names out of the initial spot, why do you need to know the candidate's name? Even their education, as far as like where they went to school, that might be also something that you take out. Maybe if your requirement, and Kimberly talked about like what you actually need in the job description, if you actually need, like truly need a computer science degree, maybe that's what the only thing that shows up. And then your actual like job history and qualifications, and that's it. That might be a good blind way to get you past the initial process. But as I alluded to, like once you get past that and you're coming on site, obviously I need to know what your name is and know more information. And that's where I think it kind of kicks in, where if you don't have the philosophy where you're intentional about hiring individuals, then it's not really going to go anywhere. But I do agree that, just again, to sum it up, there's parts of it that make sense, just not the entire thing, the entire process.
Got it. And what do you think of it as a strategy to remove bias, whether it's good or bad or indifferent?
It's a tactic. To me, it's not a strategy. The strategy is, I at X company want to hire more diverse individuals because of X, Y, and Z, right? That to me is like the philosophy. And then you start developing strategies around that. To me, like the whole blind thing is a tactic. It's an important one, but it's not really a strategy. And the reason why I say it like that is it could be lazy thinking from certain individuals who are like, I can do blind this, and now that's just going to solve racism, or that's going to solve stereotyping, or you know what I mean? Like that, just to me, it can bring in like the wrong behaviors because you think it's a quick fix or end all be all. And that's why I think it's more of a tactic than really like a strategy about like what's the core reason and initiatives that you're going to implement. And then, blind hiring, quote unquote, is the tactic and how you execute on it.
It's certainly not the initiative. And Kim, I'll shift to you real quick. So let's say we are using a blind hiring tactic. We're a company that's got an initiative to increase DEI, but we used a blind hiring system, and lo and behold, it actually did the opposite of the intended effect. So we ended up with a bunch of people that are definitely not increasing diversity. So how do you balance a diverse hiring initiative with these tools or hiring techniques that can help move the needle?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to what I had mentioned before. If you have these bias already in your process or with hiring managers or whatever that you're not addressing, you likely can hardwire them into what you're doing. And so if you have a blind technique that's not working, well, why is it not working? You can screen some things out, but hiring managers could still look at it like, okay, well, they know the progression of someone's career, or if you list the company, oh, I know that company and I know what the culture's like there, and just all this like strange stuff that can come out of it where the bias still exists. So I think you have to be very thoughtful on how and where you implement it into your process. I mean, like Noel had said, like the screening process, cutting out maybe the school that they attended, the names, the addresses, things like that, I think are important. But if you still have to focus on, if you have a blind technique, that you're still collecting the relevant data that is needed. And if there is a problem that is still coming through, then you really have to look at the other data. I mean, so if you have a blind hiring process and you're hiring in a city that is predominantly Caucasian, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, just naturally, this location is just not going to have the diverse talent that you're looking for. So then the next question is, okay, well, let's open it up geographically. I mean, that's just one example, but I think that a blind hiring technique can help supplement a process. It's not going to solve everything. You're on mute.
You're on mute, Alice.
Again, okay. So, excuse me, guys. So let's use this as an opportunity for a little group question then. So, Damina, this one was originally for you, but I'll ask it to everybody because I think there's a lot of reasons for this. So what do you think, first, you, Damina, what do you think the main reason that a diversity initiative will fail?
I'm gonna give you two reasons. Because I, can't stop at one. I think that it's one of the stakeholders is not prioritizing it. I think it could be the recruiter, it could be the hiring manager, or it could be the leader of the business or company you support. All three of those people have to believe in it and have to be prioritizing it, or it's not going to work. And then the second reason I'm going to give you is I think that sometimes hiring managers or recruiters or the leaders, they prioritize speed over diversity. So they are trying to make the quick or fast hire to solve some kind of business goal or deliverable that they have. And I think it's our job as recruiters to push them to make the best hire and call out those blind spots versus making the easiest hire.
Awesome. And Noelle, do you have anything that you want to add to that? What do you think the main reason is that hiring initiatives fail around diversity?
I mean, I think, Damina hit all the points I would say. I would just add, in general, I think it's just poor planning and poor attention. I think it's looking, as you said, I was like looking at the quotas, versus something else, versus quality. And just really not doing it for the right reasons. Are you just trying to get your numbers up in a way that looks better to the media or it looks better to your shareholders? Or do you really understand the moral and business case for it? Because if you don't, once it kind of runs its course, like a lot of things in society, does in the media, everybody's up in arms, and then once things get quiet, are you still pushing forward with that? Are you consistent? And oftentimes the answer is no. And we've seen it because in tech, has it been at least a decade where we've seen articles? I can go back until 2010, probably before. Does tech have a problem with diversity? I've seen articles like every year with that headline. I think we all have, and the numbers don't seem to be really getting like any better. Maybe they've gone up from 3 to 5%, maybe, but it's like in 15, 20 years, where is the needle actually moving like fast enough? And I don't know the answer to that, but I do know we've been asking that question for a long time, and we seem to not be moving towards a result.
Got it. And Kim, outside of making sure that alignment's there and that proper planning is there, is there anything else that you think that could add to the fact that some diversity initiatives fail?
I mean, I agree with everything that was said so far. My top reason was what Noelle had said. I mean, doing it for the wrong reasons, not being genuine. But you can be genuine and not take action either. I mean, so it's a combination of that, but couldn't agree more with everyone else.
Awesome, guys. And we are making it towards the end of our session here. So I'll leave us all with this last and final question. It seems like obviously dismantling the bro culture that's so prevalent in tech is something that's way overdue, but I think we can all agree. So what do you think, and I'll ask this to each of you, what are your predictions for diversity in the tech industry, let's say in both 5 years from now and 10 years from now? You think we'll be successful? Noelle, let's start with you.
Yeah, I was trying to unmute quick enough. As I look and I see more diverse individuals starting their own companies, some tech startups, females, African American, Latinx individuals, I have hope for the future with those leaders that innately and from a business sense, they'll make it a priority to hire more diverse individuals. I also think that kind of the coastal philosophy of tech companies now, and even other major companies, are starting to go more remote, use additional technology that will open it up to individuals. I'm hoping that with the recent developments in the world, not just this country, it will finally stick to a point where the younger generation, the Gen Z and those younger, are just so tired of it now. And you see those at the march where they just like, no more of this, that will translate into the business world. So I guess that's a long-winded way of me saying that I have a lot of hope as we see individuals like all of us on the phone move into more leadership positions. And hopefully the diversity of the country will start matching up with the diversity in the business world. So I think my 5-year, I can see it going up quite a bit. And then 10 years, I'm hoping it just becomes the norm where you can move further and further away from these diversity initiatives. It just becomes part of the culture.
Well said. Davina, you're up.
All right. So I don't think that diversity is just a problem in tech. I think it's a world problem right now. In particular, I think in the US, we have a gap in leadership when it comes to diversity, not to get political, but I think it starts from the top. And hopefully on November 3rd, a lot of people vote. Just saying, register and vote November 3rd. What's that?
Get out there and vote, kids.
Yeah. But the thing that gives me hope is that while we have this lack of leadership at the top in the US right now, I think you've seen companies step up and lead on issues of race and environmental issues. You see just everyday people, normal people, like everyone on this panel, everyone listening to this panel. Obviously, you care about diversity. So that gives me hope. And I think it's just this pivotal moment in history with Black Lives Matter being front and center, that I hope we act and we actually drive change, and we don't squander this opportunity, and that we keep the momentum, and that eventually tech, the population in tech looks like the population of this country and the world. That's my hope.
Awesome. Kim, you're up.
So I'm definitely going to speak for just hiring and growth in general. I mean, technology is a part of the recruiting that my team does, but we also do sales and corporate and everything else across the board. And this is a consistent focus, not just in the technology part of our organization. And I think that, with diversity has been a hot topic for way too long in this area, with not a whole lot of action. And I think that events that have happened, recently this year have been prompting the right discussions to start. And I am encouraged that it'll keep trending in the right direction, that we'll really figure out how to focus on diversity, to promote innovation, and just holistically bring companies and everyone up to a level where they really need to be. And I think companies are going to be taking it seriously, because if they don't, they're not going to keep up with their competitors. It's just, they're not going to be able to innovate, and they're going to fall behind. And so I think there's a lot of stakeholders in this, and I don't know, I'm very encouraged by it. And I think that we're just at the tip of the iceberg.
Awesome, guys. Acknowledgement is the first step, right? So at least we've gotten that out of the way. Well, say this, I really appreciate all of you joining us this afternoon. We're very grateful to have you here. It's been an awesome discussion. And thank you, everybody in the audience, for joining. See here, and I believe we're up on time, guys. So if anybody has anything that they want to add, we can.
Thank you, Ella. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much. It's awesome meeting all of you guys, and excited to do this again here soon.
Yeah.